After the Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean in 1912, the world believed the nightmare was finally over. But for the survivors floating in lifeboats surrounded by darkness, the real horror had only just begun. Freezing winds cut across the ocean, while terrified passengers listened to the screams of hundreds of people dying in the icy water around them. The Titanic was gone. More than 1,500 people were now trapped in the freezing Atlantic, and almost nobody could survive for long in water that cold. Survivors later said the screams were the most horrifying sound they had ever heard. Men, women, and children cried for help in complete darkness while lifeboats drifted helplessly nearby. But fear filled the boats themselves. Many passengers begged the officers to turn back and rescue people from the water. Others refused, terrified that desperate survivors would swamp the lifeboats and kill everyone on board. Arguments broke out as the cries slowly became weaker and weaker. Then, after nearly an hour, the screaming suddenly stopped. An eerie silence spread across the Atlantic Ocean. Survivors later said that silence was even more terrifying than the screams themselves. As dawn approached, the rescue ship Carpathia finally arrived after racing through dangerous iceberg fields at full speed. Captain Arthur Rostron had pushed his ship and crew to the limit after receiving Titanic's distress calls. Crew members prepared blankets, coffee, soup, and medical stations for survivors. One by one, lifeboats emerged from the darkness. Passengers aboard the Carpathia stared in shock as exhausted survivors climbed onto the rescue ship. Many were covered in ice, barely able to speak. Others collapsed immediately after boarding. Some mothers searched desperately for missing children, while families realized loved ones were gone forever. But the Atlantic still held terrifying reminders of what happened. Floating everywhere were chairs, suitcases, wooden debris, and hundreds of frozen bodies wearing life jackets. Rescue crews were horrified by the scale of the disaster. Meanwhile, back in New York, thousands of people crowded the harbour waiting for news. Families desperately searched newspapers, hoping to find the names of loved ones among the survivors. Reporters rushed through the streets, screaming headlines about the sinking of the unsinkable Titanic. When the Carpathia finally arrived in New York on April 18th, rain poured across the harbour as survivors stepped onto land. Huge crowds waited silently. Some people cried with relief while others collapsed after realising family members would never return. The entire world was shocked. Newspapers everywhere demanded answers. How could the greatest ship ever built disappear on its very first voyage? Why were there not enough lifeboats? Why had iceberg warnings been ignored? Soon, official investigations began in both America and Britain. Survivors, officers, and crew members were questioned for days. The testimonies revealed a series of deadly mistakes. Titanic had been travelling too fast through dangerous ice fields. Important iceberg warnings never reached Captain Smith. Lifeboats had launched half empty while hundreds remained on board. But another mystery caused outrage around the world. A nearby ship called the Californian had been much closer to Titanic than the Carpathia. Some survivors believed its crew could actually see Titanic's distress rockets in the distance. Yet the Californian never came to help because its radio operator had gone to sleep before the disaster unfolded. People were furious. As investigations continued, heartbreaking personal stories also emerged. Wealthy businessmen had given up lifeboat seats to save women and children. Musicians reportedly continued playing music until the final moments of the sinking. Married couples chose to stay together instead of separating to survive. One of the most famous stories involved Ida and Isidore Strauss, owners of Macy's department store. Witnesses claimed Ida refused to leave her husband behind, saying, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." Both died together aboard the Titanic. The disaster changed maritime history forever. New laws required ships to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. International iceberg patrols were created to monitor dangerous ice in the Atlantic. Radio operators were ordered to remain on duty 24 hours a day so emergency messages could never again be missed. But even decades later, Titanic continued haunting the world. Movies, books, and conspiracy theories kept the story alive for generations. Some people claimed the sinking was caused by sabotage or cursed artifacts on board. Others believed wealthy elites secretly escaped, while ordinary passengers were left to die. Then, in 1985, explorers finally located the wreck of the Titanic nearly 4 kilometers beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Using deep-sea cameras, researchers discovered the ship broken into 2 massive sections resting silently on the ocean floor. Shoes, dishes, suitcases, and personal belongings still remain scattered across the wreck site. For many people, seeing the wreck made the tragedy feel real again. The once magnificent ship now looked like a rust-covered ghost lost in total darkness. Scientists warned the wreck was slowly disappearing as bacteria consumed the metal year after year. Eventually, even the Titanic itself may completely vanish beneath the ocean. Today, more than a century later, the Titanic remains one of the most famous disasters in human history. Not just because of the iceberg, but because of the fear, mistakes, heroism, and heartbreak that unfolded during those final hours. And deep beneath the freezing Atlantic Ocean, the wreck of the Titanic still rests silently in darkness, as if the ship itself is guarding the memories of everyone who never came home.